Hold on tight, spider monkeys. It's Halloween! Hello, I'm Antonio D'Amico, this is Pointy Hat, and welcome to D&D with a twist. Spooky, ooky, babadooky Halloween edition. This is a show where I take a D&D thing, could be a class, could be a race, could be a monster, it's a Halloween episode, so guess, and I give that thing a twist that you can use in your own games. Yes, there is a treat waiting for you at the end of this video, so let's get to it. So when I think of vampires, I think of...
They didn't like the color of our skin.
Or the fact that we killed and ate people.
Probably more that.
Vampires are, well, you know, vampires. They are undead humanoids that want to suck your blood. Undead come in many shapes and sizes and levels of decomposition, but as I outlined in my undead video, side note, watch the undead video, please. It took a long time, please watch it, please, thank you. I categorize undead in incorporeal and corporeal, and vampires are very much in the corporeal side of things, although they are very different from other corporeal undead. You see, most corporeal undead look gross, which is not the case for vamps. They look much closer to a living being than basically any other undead, and they are famous for requiring sustenance, and a very particular type of sustenance at that. So before we get into what vampires are in D&D specifically, we gotta talk about the concept of the vampire. Vampirism as a concept is literally as old as dirt. If we define a vampire as a being that lives off of feeding on vital essence, and more specifically blood, as our friend Misspedia here does, this means that vampires in one form or another are basically present in nearly every culture around the world, since basically the beginning of time. There are Chinese vampires, Ghanaian vampires, Caribbean vampires, Greek vampires, that weird girl in high school that drew 2 dots on her neck with Sharpie hoping somebody would ask her about them, and of course your Eastern European boys that most people associate with the word vampire today. Because of this, vampire lore is convoluted and varies wildly. Even if we just take the Eastern European Slavic variety of vampire, which I plan to do for the rest of this video, there are many different ways to conceptualize a vampire, and many pieces of lore that are either incorporated, changed, or straight up ignored when someone puts vampires into their modern story. Among many examples, vampire lore states that they are obsessed with counting, and a good way to stop a vampire is to spread a bunch of seats at your doorstep, which will compel them to count every single one of them and will therefore be too busy to enter your house. This is ignored in 99% of the time in most vampire media, probably because it makes them look silly, although there is a very well-known example of a vampire that adheres to this.
1, 2, 3, loud as you please. 1, 2, 3, counting with ease.
And there are thousands of these. Vampires are said not to have a reflection in a mirror or show up in pictures. The TV show True Blood explains that this was misinformation started by vampires themselves so they could prove that they were in fact not vampires. Vampires are said not to be able to enter someone's house uninvited, a lore tidbit that has a 50% chance of being picked up in any vampire media. Some legends state that they cannot cross running water, some state that they can only be off by a stake through the heart. As I said, there are like hundreds of these. The only ones that you can probably bet on when talking about Eastern European vampires, which most modern vampire media is based on, are that they are averse or outright killed by sunlight and that they drink blood to survive. And even then, some extremely influential modern examples of vampire media change or ignore these.
This is the skin of a killer, Bill.
So now that we have more context as to what vampire lore is, let's take a look at the incarnation of the vampire in D&D. In D&D, vampires are few and far between. We basically have two. First off, vampires spawn. Vampires spawn are CR 5, which is about mid-range for most campaigns, and are basically a weaker version of the main vampire monster. They are very much on the lower end of the difficulty scale as far as CR 5 creatures go, having very low hit points and not compensating at all for this. Their highest stat is at 16, when most of the CR 5 monsters are swinging big boy 20s and 18s, and their mind stats are bad, the highest being charisma with a measly 12. They get some trademark abilities, like they are able to regenerate damage if they're not hit with radiant attacks, and they can climb up vertical surfaces and ceilings, Japanese movie Ghost style. They also get a bunch of weaknesses, which is where we find the lore relevant vampire weaknesses present in D&D. They can't enter a house without being invited first in. They are harmed by running water. They insta die if hit with a good old stake plus heart combo, and they take damage and disadvantage on most rolls when in sunlight. All in all, a weak CR 5 monster, even if surprisingly faithful to a lot of vampire lore tidbits. It's very clear that the vampire spawn are not here to be the main attraction. That honor goes to the true heavy hitters. Honest to God, vampires. We go from the baby, kinda weak CR 5 vampire spawn to the very high CR 13 vampire. Compared to their spawn, vampires get a ton of extra abilities and traits. They get the regeneration and spider climb abilities and the vampire weaknesses that the vampire spawn gets, including the stake to the heart. But vampires get so many more abilities related to vampire lore that really make them feel like a true vampire. They can shapeshift into a bat or mist, also part of vampire lore. The mist form allows them to be immune to all non-magical damage, and their bat form gives them a flight speed while still allowing them to use their bite attack. They also get the Misty Escape trait, which means that when they drop to 0 hit points outside of their spooky, ooky red velvet coffin, they turn into mist. If the vampire in mist form can get back to their resting place in less than 2 hours, they go into dark, unholy, undead slumber, which is honestly just a worse version of a short rest. And after a while, they're back on their feet and good to go for a second round. They can summon rats, bats, and wolves to the battlefield, which is yet another piece of vampire lore, as is their charm ability, as several incarnations of vampires are said to be able to glamour people to get them to do what the vampire needs. They also get what, in my opinion, is the worst and absolutely not vampire relevant ability a monster can get: legendary resistance. If the vampire fails a saving throw, it just chooses to succeed it. The size that it succeeded the saving throw, even if it failed.
No matter what anybody says, in my mind, in my world, in my fantasy, I won.
A bunch of high level monsters get this. I've used it twice, both times my players and I absolutely hated it. It never feels fair, and it's especially shitty for casters that cast anything other than Fireball or a damaging spell. Hey, I'm not saying you can't use it. I'm just saying I think it's an unfair thing to do to your players. But do whatever you want to do, not my game, not my problem, not my circus, not my monkeys. Moving on. Next up, we have not a monster, but a racial option: Dhampirs. Dhampirs are part of what I like to call the middle ground races. Sometimes a player comes into D&D wanting to play something they've seen in fiction, but is less a player option and more a monster baddie you're supposed to kill in D&D. That's where middle ground races come in. Wanna play a dragon? Well, you can't, but you can play a dragon born. Wanna play a devil? Well, you can't, but you can play a tiefling. Wanna play a ghost? Well, you can't, but you can watch my video on Undead and play Phantasm, which is a race I made for that video. They are a compromise, not the actual thing, but close enough for you to feel like you kinda sorta are playing one. In actual Slavic lore, Dhampirs are the product of the union between a human and a vampire, and the actual tradition is pretty close to how we see Dhampirs in modern day media. In folklore, Dhampirs have some of the powers of their vampire parent while having few to none of the drawbacks. They can walk in the sun and don't need to drink the forbidden red juice, but they also have enhanced senses, can sniff out vampires hiding around, they can regenerate faster than normal humans, and apparently, although don't quote me on this because the sources I found of this are not extremely trustworthy, but there is apparently folklore precedent for Dhampirs being vampire hunters. It might as well be true, but it feels so Hollywood that I'm having a hard time believing it. Also, in Bulgarian folklore, Dhampirs are squishy because they have no bones. Because Bulgarian vampires have no bones, like a bloodthirsty jellyfish. Can't believe that particular detail went ignored when it comes to modern vampires. All of this translates into a D&D weird mishmash. Dhampirs can be the product of the union between a human and a vampire, but they decided to get creative with it, so in D&D you can be a Dhampir if one of the following happens. 1. Weird blood experiment. 2. About to turn into a vampire but someone took you out of the oven too soon. 3. Contracting a blood parasite? What? 4. Attacked by a vampire, but they were very bad at their job. And many, many more. In terms of abilities, they can walk in the sun, no problem. They didn't give Dhampir sunlight sensitivity. Plus F in the comments for Drow. They can eat normal food, but they do have a weird hunger thing that they have a hard time ignoring. And it can be blood, but it can also be something else, like meat, dreams, and psychic energy. Wait a minute. Day walking, draining psychic energy. Oh god.
I am what's known as a psychic vampire.
According to the statute, if Mr.
You also get 35 feet of speed, making you a bit speedier than most, dark vision because of course, you get Japanese horror movie ghost powers and can walk up walls and ceilings, you don't need to breathe, and you get a bite attack. This one does little to no damage, just a baby d4, and you get to either heal yourself for the amount of damage that you inflict or give yourself a bonus to the next ability check or attack roll equal to the roll. I get where they were going with this, but Jesus is it weak. And if you choose the bonus, it's not like Bardic Inspiration where you choose when to use the plus, you just get that on the next attack roll or check, so just attack both times instead of doing this. Like, I guess you could in theory ask a party member to let you drink their blood before doing an ability check you can see coming when out of combat. Just ask someone to cast guidance or Bardic Inspo on you, you weirdo. I honestly can only see this ability being used for roleplay, but anyway, we're done. We've gone through every vampire. That's all we needed to talk about when it comes to vampires. No other vampires in D&D. That's all of them. Oh boy, we sure did cover every single one of them. We're done. Kaput. Done. Okay, fine, I'll talk about him. No. We're not doing the organ. Cut the music. Cut the music. So you really can't make a video on D&D Vampires without mentioning Mr. Zarovich over there. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on him since he's likely to get his shine in a video about Curse of Strahd, or about Barovia, or about the Shadowfell, or about the Plains of Dread, whatever, we'll see. But here's the Cliff's Notes version. Strahd is known as the first vampire and the ruler of Barovia, a demiplane of the Shadowfell, the realm of emo. Beautiful scenery. Strahd is immensely powerful, more powerful than any other vampire. The source of his power and the origin of vampirism comes from, of course, inceldom. He was consumed by desire and basically made a deal with... Okay, hold on. I'm about to talk about some of Strahd's backstory and make very quick mentions of his stat block. If you are very sensitive to spoilers and that sounds like something you don't want to hear, skip to here, time on the screen to avoid it. Strahd's vampirism and general power come from something called the Dark Powers. No, I am not glossing over it, they're just that poorly defined. He intends to use his new powers to kill his own brother and hopefully try to convince his wife to love him. This, shockingly, does not work, even though Strahd is such a nice guy. And so he's stuck in his demiplane, endlessly chasing the reincarnations of a woman that does not love him back and making everybody miserable in the process. So yeah, Count Strahd von Zarovich, first vampire, Count of the Valley of Barovia, Dark Lord of the Plain of Dread, and Incel King.
Tell me why I'm stuck as a virgin with rage. Tell me why I so need a cute girl my age. Tell me why.
Strahd is an iconic villain because of the campaign he's in and for who he is as a person. Stat block wise, he isn't massively different to your regular vampire. The big thing that makes him hard to beat is campaign specific and completely out of his stat block. But as I said, I'll get into those specifics in another video. Just so you know, he has a bit of a Ganondorf in Zelda Breath of the Wild problem. If the players actually do their job, then it's not much to see, except without the big spectacle at the end. But anyway, we've looked at vampire folklore, we've looked at vampire spawn, vampires, dhampirs, and even Count Strahd von Incelvich himself. And those are all well and good, but what if we gave vampires a new twist? So you want to fight a vampire? Vampires are undead hotties with a creative choice in dietary restriction. So when looking at vampires in D&D, something definitely jumps out. How few of them there are. Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft gives us 2 more, and they are good. The first one is based on Chinese vampires, the Jiangshi. And can I just say, finally, we needed these. I love Jiangshi. I wish I had more time in this video to get into them and why they are so sick, but this video is already too long and I wanted to talk about the East European vampires and their modern descendants. The second one we're getting is literally called Nosferatu, and he's gross, but like in a cute way. Look at him. Love him. He's based on the titular character Nosferatu, which has become its own vampire subrace at this point in modern media. Gaunt, spooky, dehydrated vamp. Strigoi are also in the book, but despite them being named after Romanian vampires, like Dracula, they are like big mosquitoes. They are sturges that drank from vampires. Oh, and I guess there's a Mind Flayer variant too that drinks blood. Anyway, now, when I think I want to run a vampire-themed campaign, something inspired by the original Slavic and now Western idea of vampires, gothic horror and all these options do not cut it. Don't get me wrong, I would absolutely love to be in a Jiangshi-themed campaign, but they do not match the Bram Stoker vibe that we think of when we think vampire. Nor should they. They are good as they are. But there is so much vampire media that encapsulates that vibe. Movies, games, shows, books, anything you can think of. There are even whole role-playing games entirely based around being and fighting vampires. Vampire the Masquerade being the longest running and most popular one. The D&D of goths, if you will. But what if you want to play a vampire-themed D&D campaign? Your choices are very, very limited. Hell, even if you want to run a vampire-themed adventure or campaign arc, your choices are too limited. So the way forward is obvious. We want more vampires, but making just vampires that are slightly more or less powerful versions of the existing vampires to fill out different CRs would just be boring and add nothing to the game. No, we need different concepts for each of these vampires, a strong theme to tie them all together, something that can lead to not only cool roleplay moments and compelling NPCs, but cool and flashy mechanics in battle. Hear me out, 7 deadly sins. But seriously, vampires are beings that keep themselves alive because of their insatiable hunger. They are basically walking metaphors for carnal desires, pure raw id. Them being cast as tempters and temptresses for normal people is such a vampire trope at this point, it's hard to divorce them from the idea. But that aspect is absolutely not present in D&D other than a vague charm ability. Vampires feeding not just on blood, but on the most unholy desires of mortals fits perfectly. Has been used in fiction before, and I think could lead to some really cool antagonists and even cooler fights. So let's go. Mortal hearts are made of desires, and these desires don't leave when the heart stops beating. If someone holds a deep desire for something at the moment when the vampire poison snuffs out their life, that desire will come to define them in their undeath. A vampire's existence revolves around consuming to satisfy their desire. The most obvious is their consumption of blood, but they also gain energy by satisfying their hunger for a specific desire. It's the satisfaction of this desire that gives vampires most of their superhuman capabilities. It is said that when they indulge in it, their hearts beat once more, even if very briefly, and for that fleeting moment they are able to feel alive again. Sure, feeding off of the blood of mortals allows them to perform feats such as superhuman healing, but it's when they have indulged in their vice to their heart's desire that they cease to be mere spawn and become true vampires. Depending on the desire that holds most sway over them, their abilities change. Scholars of vampirism have tied these desires to categories that we know as the capital sins, no doubt to malign those affected by vampirism even further. They call these categories lineages, one for every sin. Vampires of wrath enjoy unleashing their anger, self-righteous or not, on those they judge to be deserving of their hate. Those that die with a desire for revenge or retribution in their hearts often turn into vampires of wrath. In the battlefield, they favor moves based on pure raw strength, and they are known for their berserk status. The lower their HP, the more dangerous and more powerful their attacks becoming also harder to hit and even more difficult to withstand. Vampires of envy covet what others hold dear. Those that die with a desire for something that someone other than themselves possesses turn into vampires of envy. When hunting, they steal capabilities of their enemies for themselves. A wizard facing a vampire of envy might find themselves unable to cast the spell they just sling towards the vampire, as the vampire prepares to conjure that same spell against the wizard. Vampires of gluttony have an animalistic desire for consumption. Those that wish to indulge in their vices past being satiated, just for the joy of consumption, turn into vampires of gluttony. In combat, they become impenetrable meat shields, tanking attack after attack, constantly healing themselves thanks to their vastly improved self-regeneration abilities, which come at the cost of their victims, who see their life essence sapped away to satisfy the vampire's cravings. Vampires of sloth happen when someone with the desire to ignore their responsibilities and live an idle existence neglecting their duties is afflicted with vampirism. Vampires of sloth inflict a number of effects that stop their enemies in combat, stunning them, paralyzing them, and turning them to stone in the worst of cases. They are also known to inflict exhaustion with their touch, further pushing their foes to ignore what they wanted to accomplish and give in to the pull of sloth. Vampires of lust are vampires that died with a desire to fulfill the most carnal desires in their hearts. Once awakened, they search high and low for someone that will love them back, to awaken that person's lust and turn them into a vampire, which is why they often come in pairs called paramours. In combat, the paramours change their abilities depending if they are close in proximity to one another or further apart, with abilities based on lust if close and yearning if far away. Vampires of greed die and come back as vampires with an intense desire for accumulation in their hearts. Whether it was riches, fame, even adoration, the vampires that belong to this group had the intense desire to possess something in great quantities. In the battlefield, vampires of greed accumulate power in order to unleash it later on as devastating attacks, their potency depending on how much accumulated power they had managed to hold onto before releasing their attack. And finally, vampires of pride were turned into vampires with hearts filled with ambition. They crave to accomplish a great goal, to be recognized by their peers for their accomplishments, to be seen, respected, and valued. They are the strongest of the vampire lineages, and in combat, they are able to control their acolytes to do their bidding for them, even forcing their very enemies to work for them. They are also able to feed off of the praise of those that believe in their greatness, and will stop at nothing to see their desires come to life, even if they died long ago. And those are the vampire lineages. I dare say they would make for pretty cool antagonists and even better NPCs. Think about it. Imagine an adventure where the PCs travel to a distant land, ruled by a secretive lord, only to find out entire towns have been put to a never-ending sleep by their lord, who has become a vampire of sloth. and now they have to travel into the dreams of the citizens and fight their nightmares in order to access the Lord's castle, whose gate can only be accessed while asleep. And hey, if you're a player thinking of playing a vampiric character like a Dhampir, why not use these to inform some of the character's choices, like what their hunger is? It's just a shame that you gotta come up with the stat blocks for these guys and a whole bunch of stuff, ability scores, skills. Fortunately, you don't have to because I made them. Yes, that's right. The stat blocks for the Vampire of Lust, the Vampire of Sloth, and the Vampire of Wrath are available to all of you for free. You heard that right. 3 monster stat blocks ready to be used in your games. All of them in the description of this very video. So go out there, bust out the clown white face paint and the black nail polish, and be goth! I hope you like this Halloween-y episode. I love spooky stuff, so definitely expect some more spooky stuff in the future, even if it's out of season. Speaking of stuff coming your way, I'm gonna assume that you found this video because it made its way to your subscription box, in which case, thank you for subscribing and watching. We are extremely close to 100K. Like, I'm writing this, looking at the page, and it's actually wild how close we are. And if this video made its way to you while you weren't subscribed, thank you for watching it, a random video. Thank you so much for watching and commenting and sharing the video around. I hope you have a lot of fun in Halloween. If you've made it this far in the video, tell me which one of the vampire lineages would you be if you got turned into a vampire? That's a fun thematic question. If you're going to a party, have fun, drink responsibly. See ya, love you, bye bye. Mwah.